the effectiveness of these structures. Of course, there are people here who have handled such projects, and then of course there are large-scale restoration measures which one can talk about, and one of them could be a complete morphological restoration where the effects have started. This might involve some interventions, but then this is possible. Creation of new habitats if the old habitats have been lost. How do we do that? And then of course the reintroduction of the fish fauna which have been lost, for example. These are ecological restoration measures one can actually plan and one can actually think about, for example. I guess I'll leave it here for now, and I will turn over to the panelist, and I would perhaps start with Dr. Bharat Jhunjhunwala to give his comments to start with, and then I'll come over to the other panelists. And as I said, please restrict to the points if possible, 5 to 6 minutes in the first round so that we have enough time for discussion.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Rajiv. You see, to my mind, the solution will not lie in mitigation measures. Fish passes are not effective beyond 3 to 5, maximum 5 meters, whereas most of the hydropower projects have barrages and dams which go up to 70 or 60 or 30 meters. So fish passes are not going to work. Secondly, the major problem in my opinion is longitudinal connectivity, because the migration of fish upwards and the flow of sediment downwards are both very fundamental to the ecological system of the river. And this cannot be done once you make a barrage or a weir or something, an obstruction across the river. Then these flows of the fish upwards and the sediment downwards cannot be managed even to mimic the natural conditions. It's not possible. Fish will not migrate, sediments will not come, and therefore the basic integrity of the river will be. Secondly, the cultural aspect, once you have a barrage, the water quality changes, the stagnation of water takes place in the reservoir. So to my mind, the present model of hydropower, where you make a structure across the riverbed, is totally unacceptable. Now, I have seen, there is one project, Tasmania project in Alaska, where what they have done is they have made a spur on the side of the river, and they are pushing the water into a tunnel for generation of hydropower and allowing the rest to flow freely. I think that is the kind of solution. Although this Tasmania project is a very small project, 1 megawatt, but I have spoken to other experts and I do not see any fundamental reason why this cannot be upscaled to 100 megawatt or 200 megawatt. Basically, the point is that we have to extract part of the water from the river and allow remaining part of the water to flow freely, so that the fish and sediments and the cultural and the water quality can be maintained in the rest of the water, and that much of damage of the part of the water that goes into the turbines, that we may have to accept. The major problem is not technical in my view. Although I'm not an engineer by training, and some engineers have disagreed with me, others have agreed. I really think it is technically possible to divert part of the water of the river while maintaining a continuous flow in the remaining water. Actually, the suggestion I'm giving does not lead to even loss of hydropower generation. The IIT Roorkee report says that 30% of the river length should be left for free flow for the river to regenerate. So 30% of the potential we are losing. Of the balance 70%, they are recommending 10 to 15, that may be 15 to 20% as environmental flow. So total we are losing about 40% of the hydropower potential. All I am saying is that instead of splitting the river into sections and losing 40% of the hydropower in certain sections and generating 60% in others, why don't you split the river into longitudinally and use 40% of the river for generation of for free flow and 60% for generation of hydropower. So if we split the water longitudinally, the basic ecological functions of the river will be saved without any loss of hydropower. The major problem will be peaking power. Because once you make a barrage, you can hold water for 6 to 8 hours and use the storage for generation of hydropower. But in longitudinal splitting or diverting part of the river, you will have to create additional storage areas, which may or may not be possible in the hill areas. So it is conceivable that some of the present hydropower projects will have to be converted from peaking to base load stations. So that will be one cost that we will have to we should be willing to bear. The second would be that there will be additional cost, because making a barrage may be easier, creating a longitudinal structure and other things, there may be some increase in capital cost of this project. And third, of course, is that whatever is the water that you allow to be left as environmental flow, that will be lost. So I don't, the real issue is whether we are willing to accept the small increase in cost of maybe 50 paisa per unit or 1 rupee per unit. These are just my guesstimates for maintaining riverbed connectivity, which includes socio-cultural, environmental. And I think this is a very small cost to pay for maintaining the ecological balance in the country. The the main technical problem that was mentioned to me in creating this kind of a spur-based diversion system is that the Ganga has very huge variation in flows from about 100 cumecs to maybe 1500 cumecs. I don't think this is an unsurmountable problem. There are spurs have been designed. Whether we create a structure in the middle of the riverbed, I do not know. I think there would be many other alternatives. I really think we need to look at this alternative. Hydropower, I would ideally like no hydropower in the country. I think all rivers are holy. I think Kaveri and Krishna and Godavari and Narmada are as holy as Ganga. But in case the country has to take a decision and you still want to generate hydropower, I think the basic socio-cultural and ecological integrity of the river system should be maintained. Otherwise, we will face large costs in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for keeping the time, Dr. Jhunjhunwala. So, may I now request Professor Gosain to comment on the issues?
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. I think if we try to see that why we have come to this situation, because historically, when the engineers were posed with these problems of generating hydropower, most of these issues were not even known to people. People did find, yes, there's a fish problem, the fish ladders were designed and put, but most of the biodiversity issues were not even in focus. Most of these dams have been constructed around 100 years ago, and engineers have started learning. There are other domain experts who have started posing these problems. So technically, whatever is being said, I don't think that you can say that anything which people are proposing is not feasible. Anything can be made feasible provided you are willing to spend the required amount of money. Many of these projects become unfeasible on account of the expenditure which you are envisaging at that time. But we have also seen that in general, most of the problems are connected with what is the cost at that time, that particular time, whatever activity you want to take up. So I think the feasibility is something which is dynamic. You cannot freeze this with a specific time. At this juncture, if we look at the case of Ganga, which is being debated, I think whatever is being proposed by Professor Jhunjhunwala, nobody can claim that is not possible. You can take out water at a particular location. And why only spur? There are many other ways of taking out water. You can even pump the water from some location. There are natural depressions, you can pump it from there. And then have a cascade of tunnels. Now then when it comes to tunnels, again the question will come, should we allow those many tunnels to be put into the local hills and have a series of hydropower projects installed, taking into account or taking advantage of the natural drop which is taking place in that terrain. So the question again comes of feasibility. I feel the best option is, at this juncture, let's try to put together what are the parameters which you want to restore, which we are very concerned with, out of which sediment is one, the flow or the volume of water, how it has to be distributed. Because that distribution again, if you look at how it's distributed, the nature has decided how it's distributed. There are seasons, there are distributions, there is snow melt, there is glacier melt. All those things have been defined, at least if you look into the last 500 years, there's a pattern. But if you go beyond that, nobody knows that what was the pattern at that time. So if you're trying to restore that, then we have to also ask the question, is this pattern sacrosanct? May not be true. If I impose on this the climate change issues, which are becoming almost, there is a certainty about that, what is going to be the pattern around that time? So are you going to restore the pattern which is going to be changing on account of the climate change back to what we have been observing in the past 500 years? It may not be possible. You might have to really do a lot of interventions to bring it back to that. So I think we have to think in terms of the trade-offs. If something is going to happen, can we take that into consideration? And climate change might not be very feasible, very much apparent in the near vicinity. In the next 30 years, it might start taking shape, it might start making some changes, but it's going to happen beyond that. So all your projects, they are having a lifespan of around 50 years to 60 years, all these projects which you're talking of. So I think these are dynamic situations where we shouldn't take stands which are rigid stands. We have to look at the science part of it, try to understand what are the parameters which are on the distribution, the parameters on the financial side, whether they are feasible at this juncture. If we generate power and there is nobody to pay for that, then is it really appropriate to generate that power? And also the morphological issues, the issues of biota, the issues of biodiversity. But biodiversity, we should put a price. I think a lot of studies need to be done. We still are somewhat short of the proper understanding, the full understanding before we take action, and we try to ensure that that all those parameters are taken into consideration. And then the question of what is the religious requirement of this particular system, because this is a system which is having the religious requirements. So how that distribution has to be taken care of. And ultimately we might find that if the flow is not going to be available, which is the past historical flows, either on account of the changing situations or on account of your own development, because hills are also developing, your demand on account of small demands, if they add up to big demands. And what we are doing to the existing quality of water, I think we have not been debating that. These are issues which are visible to everybody. But I think there are associated issues which nobody is paying any attention, that on account of our own man-made actions, whether it is the changing of the land use, whether it is bringing in the fertilizers, whether it is